Thanks, Zoom. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let's start this interview here. So tell me about the history and the lasting legacy of Hank Greenspun. What stood out to you when you first learned about?
When I first heard about Hank Greenspun, it was all about the newspaper, the Las Vegas Sun, and everybody who knew Hank Greenspun gave him a lot of credit for running this newspaper that was pretty fearless. He was not afraid to take on local politicians and mobsters, and he even had a bit of a political career attached to it. And again, when I first got to Las Vegas, that's pretty much all anybody talked about, was how he was a bit of a muckraker, newspaper publisher who really made a name for himself in this town. What I found out the longer I was here was that the newspaper really wasn't his entire life. That's what people knew him for, but he was a much bigger person than just a publisher. And I guess the more I find out about the guy, the more fascinated I am too. He really made a name for himself in real estate. And I think that's the big misconception that journalists or students, especially in the building, have, is that he became this rich and powerful person through the newspaper. It wasn't the newspaper that did it for him. It was being at the right place at the right time and buying up a lot of land. The Greenspun family really made their fortunes off of Green Valley, not the Las Vegas Sun. And there's quite a biography attached to Hank Greenspun. Another thing that I found surprising was that there are probably more people in Israel who think of Hank Greenspun as a national hero than Las Vegans or people in the United States think of Hank Greenspun as a national hero. And it took a while to figure this out because some of the stories about Hank Greenspun's involvement with Israel are kind of mysterious. You don't get all the facts, but as I understand it, he was a soldier in World War II stationed in Europe. He'd left New York. He grew up in New York as this sort of tough son of a Jewish family and went off to fight for the Americans. And while he was there, the word got out about the concentration camps in Germany and Poland. And he took this all very seriously. And when he got home, decided he was going to do everything he could to help this newly found nation of Israel, and got wrapped up in a pretty controversial series of events. He helped engineer shipments of arms over to the Israelis who were fighting off invasions from their Arab neighbors. And the reason he's thought of so highly to this day in Israel is because the people who are there now realize they probably wouldn't have a nation if it had not been for this shipment of arms from Hank Greenspun. He did this illegally. I mean, you can't just ship arms off to nations without full government approval, especially during times of peace. So, yeah, he was charged with felonies for violating wartime measures and all the rest. He eventually was pardoned for the crimes, but in the meantime, now this is where it gets tricky, and I got to be careful with what I say. There are some versions of this story that he took the money from the arms sales and wound up buying this big chunk of land off to the east of us that was at the time just barren desert. It was this wide open expanse of nothing. And he wanted people to move there as part of this new community that would blossom in the desert. So as a way of attracting people, He described this area as Green Valley. It certainly wasn't green at the time. It was just desert. But you can't attract anybody to live in a place called Desert Valley. So he went with green because it sounded lush. Plus, it was a play on words with his name of Greenspun, Green Valley. Mm-hmm. And to this day, it's one of the most well-developed areas in all of Las Vegas. The area stretches from Sunset and Green Valley Parkway down to Green Valley Ranch. That's all Hank Greenspun's legacy right there. Uh-huh. So they built up this empire or fortune from all the development that went into that area, and helped to build a media empire while they were at it too. They invested some of this money in the Las Vegas Sun and made it an award-winning paper. They wound up taking the Pulitzer Prize a while back. It was 2007. Better double check the date on that. And for a long time, we're really cutting edge. Now, you will go to Greenspun Hall to this day, and if you go downstairs, you'll see pictures of Hank shaking hands of some pretty important people, Menachem Begin and Yitzhak Rabin, and I believe Anwar Sadat. I mean, these heads of state, the Egyptians and the Israelis especially. And there's Hank Greenspun. Well, it's not just a coincidence. It wasn't just a photo op. He did play a role in helping get these people connected up and developing that famous Camp David Peace Accord. And for my purposes in class, when I talk about Hank Greenspun in the history of journalism, he was also famous for this incident in 1952 when Joe McCarthy came to town. Joe McCarthy was this famous or infamous senator from Wisconsin who was on a campaign to rid the country of communists. And this really bizarre exchange took place where McCarthy came to campaign on behalf of the incumbent senator from Nevada, and Hank Greenspun was there. They were all Republicans, but for some reason, McCarthy pointed out Hank Greenspun in the audience and called him a communist, which was not true. But after the fact, McCarthy claimed he meant to call Greenspun a convict, which was true because he had charges for shipping those arms. But regardless, Greenspun was furious, got up on stage and screamed McCarthy out of the convention hall and went on this crusade with the Las Vegas Sun to expose McCarthy as this tyrant. And it caught on. Before long, the national press, Edward Murrow and CBS started going after McCarthy. And after that, McCarthy's days were numbered. So he played an instrumental role in local real estate, local politics, the press, and national politics as well. And for us in Greenspun Hall, truly the lasting legacy for the instructors and students here is this building we're in. This was completed in 2008, and it did take a lot of coordination between the Greenspuns and the state. The Greenspuns agreed to put up half of the expenses. It wound up being $100 million building, and the Greenspuns put up $50 million towards it, which was a tremendous philanthropic enterprise. There are very few families in this town, in this state, or anywhere for that matter, who are willing to put up that kind of money for educational endeavors. And yeah, you can think really highly of Hank Greenspun, Brian Greenspun. The whole Greenspun family has really kicked in to help out and create this meaningful legacy. That's a pretty long-winded answer for, the one thing that stuck out. There are a lot of things that stick out about Hank Greenspun.
Yeah. So yeah, Hank, I think you've mentioned it like briefly, but Hank Greenspun was obviously one of the first owners of the KLAS station for CBS here in Vegas. What impact did Greenspun have bringing local news to Southern Nevada?
Oh boy, let me see if I get this right. I do remember the story about Howard Hughes at the Desert Inn, who, this guy had more money than anybody. And Howard Hughes liked to watch TV in bed. That's how he fell asleep. So instead of getting a VCR, which didn't have, or DVD player, he, he went and bought up the local TV station. And he and Greenspun did have a relationship of some sorts. It's like another one of those things that's kind of tricky to nail down, but there are stories about safes with money and Nixon's papers and all the rest. Because I understand it, when Howard Hughes was done with the Desert Inn, this is where Hank Greenspun stepped in, and he wound up buying the channel for himself and became sort of an early pioneer in what you might call microcasting, or he was able to target his audience more effectively with the news channel on Channel 8. And the rest is history, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel like KOAS has like the best history out of all the channels. So you've been obviously you've been teaching a lot of classes involving, like you mentioned, history of journalism and advanced reporting. What do you usually tell your students about Hank Greenspun's commitment to investigative journalism?
I did not work directly with Hank Greenspun. I know there are faculty members who have. One of them was Kathy Espen, who passed away not long ago. And as a boss, you see somebody differently. From what I understand from her stories, he was very tough and sometimes ruthless too, which are actually traits that I tend to stay away from when it comes to features writing, because you don't want to alienate your sources. But when it came to Greenspun, he was going up against some pretty tough characters who could potentially kill him. In fact, there's a story Brian Greenspun tells about getting a knock at the door late at night when he was just a kid, and the knock woke him up, and he went down the stairs to see who was there, and there was some tough-looking characters who were about ready to take Greenspun out, Hank, and he had to beg for his life and his kid's life and all the rest, but it still didn't stop him. One of the things I think that probably gets brushed aside is how effective the newspaper can be as a PR tool as well. Hank Greenspun certainly would have promoted his own developments out on the east side of town. And if there was somebody standing in the way, a competitor, he could use the Las Vegas Sun as a way of exposing them. There are certain things you can do in public as a publisher, but other things that you kind of want to keep under wraps too. I think he was pretty good at both of those.
Okay, so what does it mean to you when you see Greenspun's name around the building and outside near Greenspun Hall?
I'm proud of it. I think it's a good name to be associated with. I'm not sure that many students across the country would know exactly who Hank Greenspun is, but those who do think highly of him. And I don't know what he would think of us. I guess that's one thing that's kind of made me wonder if he were here today, what kind of advice he would give to the faculty and the students as well. I think it's important to try to live up to the name. Otherwise, it's just a name on a building, right?
That is true.
Same time, it is what you make of it. I say the same thing of UNLV. When I return to Minneapolis and visit with family or friends, half the people who have heard of UNLV think highly of it. But there's a whole other half who've never even heard of it. They're not even aware that there's a university in Las Vegas, because all anybody hears about Las Vegas is the Strip and all the rest. I suspect the same is true of Greenspun Hall. For those who have heard of Hank Greenspun, I'm sure they're pretty impressed, but there are too many, especially in the United States, strangely enough, who have not. I do remember a dean back in Florida who was very linked up or tied to Israel. When he heard that I was at UNLV in the Greenspun School, he was very impressed. He thought, wow, that's great. Hank Greenspun, he did a lot of good for Israel. And he knew right away. I didn't have to explain anything to him or anything. So I think it's probably important for the folks in this building right now to go visit those pictures down on the first floor and figure out what's going on there. Who is this guy? I suspect a lot of people walk by those pictures and don't even know who that guy in those pictures is. It's Hank Greenspun. They named a building after him.
Yeah, I think, there's like a lot of history ingrained in Hank Greenspun. Is there anything else you want to say about like Hank Greenspun or anything about the Greenspun building in particular?
Well, sure. This is kind of I think it's kind of silly anecdote, but it's fun. I like it a lot, actually. A few years ago, I was doing some research for this textbook that we use in the 413 class, and I wanted to find out more about Hank Greenspun for a few pages I've got on him in the book, and wound up digging through an FBI file on him. There is quite a bit in there. It's been published. You can find it online. And some of the stuff in there is what I've already described with the arms deal and some of his activities going up against the mobsters and all the rest. But there was one bit of info in there that I thought was kind of funny, actually. Back in 1989, I believe it was, there was this activist group, the Animal Liberation Front. They were sort of a branch of PETA at the time. And they had busted into campus, UNLV, to liberate goats that were being housed in labs for experimentation, which, it's illegal. You can't do that. You can't bust onto property like that when it's secure and liberate goats. But the next day, after news got out, Hank Greenspun published an editorial saying he had no problem with what the protesters were doing because they were trying to protect these innocent animals. And for that, he got an FBI file. They put him on record as supporting the Animal Liberation Front, which I thought was, okay, good for you. I mean, if that's what it takes to get a federal record, go for it. So no problem with being on the FBI's list. That's my final thought, I suppose.
All right. Yeah. Well, thank you, Greg. It's been a pleasure doing this interview with you. Let me first of all stop this recording.